Now, the hit Netflix drama Adolescence has made television history in the United Kingdom. The show about the social media fueled killing of a girl by a 13-year-old boy also making waves around the world. The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he's watching Adolescence with his children, and the show is reigniting debate on smartphone bans in schools. Here's a look at Adolescence. Now, each of the 4 episodes of Adolescence was filmed in a single shot. The camera work is brilliant, and the show isn't about who committed the crime, but why. Adolescence spans 13 months, and here's the show's co-creator Stephen Graham explaining what inspired him.
I was reading about an incident and I'd seen an incident on the telly, again, where there was like quite a few young boys who stabbed young girls and taken their life. And if I'm really honest with you, it hurt my heart. And then normally the narrative would be that you'd follow the family of the victim, which rightly so, do you know what I mean? But I wanted to twist it, I wanted to flip it and reverse it. Because myself, when I see these incidents or when I've read about these incidents in the past, I judge them and I think, it must be the family. And I wanted to twist it and let's look at it from a different perspective. And what if it's not the family?
We can now bring in Jack Halberstam, Professor of Gender Studies at Columbia University. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Adolescence very quickly puts the spotlight on incel culture. What exactly is incel culture?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. Incel culture is a very sort of niche corner of masculinity where young boys feel as if they are being marginalized actually by women, not by the culture, but by women who don't find them attractive.
In the past, a child's behavior was reflective of their parents, their friends, their teachers. Is now social media, is it now a factor?
Social media is a factor in everything, but this is a generation that came of age on screens, and it's uncharted territory. We don't exactly know, but we're finding out in scary ways what it means when kids are isolated from each other, but joined by screens that then connect them to all kinds of toxic cultures online. So the show Adolescence definitely deals with that and suggests that there are dark corners of the internet where young boys are easily influenced by figures like Andrew Tate.
I want to talk about that because episode 3 of the show is essentially the character Jamie being evaluated by a psychologist, a female psychologist. He's shy in very small bits, but what struck me was the manner in which he speaks to the female psychologist. Either he tries to flirt with her or he's talking down at her. He oscillates between the two. Is this reflective of incel culture?
I mean, who knows what's reflective of incel culture? I don't think it has a kind of uniform identity. It just seems to be a sort of weird, marginalized, violent corner of manhood, where men who feel that women aren't paying them the proper kinds of attention decide to wreak revenge. And I do think in that 3rd episode, in the interactions with the therapist, you see the pushes and pulls that are inherent to adolescent masculinity in this culture, the need to be recognized by girls and women who you simultaneously despise and want attention from. And that's exactly the kind of dynamic that you're describing. But the other thing to say here is that this series comes at a really important time in the culture where the very men who just, say, 5 years ago were being called to the carpet for sexual harassment and um, the Me Too movement was in full flow, those men are now governing culture, governing big nations like the U.S. I mean, we're watching every day as unchecked toxic masculinity is not being played out just in a high school, but is being played out in the highest offices of governance and government.
So then how do you combat it, given that people like, as you said, the US president, I mean, they're there?
Right. You combat it by pushing back on these insane narratives that the main threat to the culture that we live in comes in the form of trans women who want to use the women's bathroom or want to play in women's sports, as opposed to the threat coming from the way in which we train straight men to be straight. I mean, if I were to say publicly, in a major newspaper, we need to rethink heterosexual masculinity, I'd be laughed out of the room. But we can hear every single day about why trans people are unnatural or are accessing healthcare that they shouldn't, or whatever it may be. So we're living in the world dreamed of by toxic masculinity. And I think Adolescence, apart from the fact that it's an incredibly well-made show, is tapping into some of the fears that people have right now about this this patriarchal culture and its resurgence.
Stay with us, Jack, because my colleague interviewed Caitlin Moran, a journalist and author of What About Men, and asked her if Adolescence was a watershed moment when it comes to dealing with the rise of toxic masculinity. Take a listen.
You look at what the women's movement has done. We have empowered women. We can talk about our emotions. We have very tight-knit communities, but there isn't that kind of cultural information and support for young boys. And so into this void, the only people who step forward are people on the far right and in the manosphere, like Andrew Tate. And ostensibly, what he offers is what young boys want. They want to be told how to be men. Unfortunately, the kind of advice that Andrew Tate is giving them is not going to help them to become men, because it's basically down to you need to become very fit, very hench and ripped to go to the gym. You need to invest in cryptocurrency, and you need to blame any problems in your life on wokery and women. There was a recent report saying that teenage boys are more likely to have a smartphone than have a father in their houses. And even if you're in a single parent family, you don't have a father there, we need to make sure our communities have support for boys.
Jack, I'd like to bring you in once again because episode 4 of Adolescence essentially demonstrates the opposite of a toxic masculinity. You see James's father there, who is he's not beating up his wife. He's a loving husband. What should but besides the fact that despite this, his son still goes astray. So what should parents be doing, in your opinion? I mean, how can you stay on top of a teenager?
Yeah, I think that's probably not the question. How do you manage your teenage boys? I think the question is what messages in the culture are being distributed through all of the banal networks that we know of, whether it's a social media platform or the news or TV. How are those messages arriving at young men who are receiving lots of contradictory information about the culture? And one answer to this doesn't come in the form of like, hey, women are having these hard conversations, why aren't boys and men? One of the answers is about the way in which we enforce this strict gender binary in the context of the nuclear family. That clearly is both an outmoded and potentially a dangerous social structure to just keep enforcing without any questions about its implication in the production of toxic masculinity. And I know we're probably running short of time, but there's another piece of this that I think is important. You know, you've had segments on the news today about the fear of the rise of fundamental Islam. But what about the rise of fundamentalist Christianity, which of course is fueling the authoritarian capitalism and toxic masculinity that we currently live with? We need to be asking different questions about the culture that we inhabit and stop looking to the same old explanations.
Jack, very, very briefly, if you will, we saw that Australia has restricted social media for under 16s. Is this something states should be looking at doing, considering that teenagers know how to outsmart the system?
Yeah, well, I honestly think we should all restrict social media for everybody, for ourselves. This is clearly out of control. Yes, probably you should restrict it for under 16s, but we should probably all of us get off these platforms run by plutocrats and billionaires.
Jack Halberstam, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. More news coming up on Around the World. Stay tuned.